Thank you very much, Gail, for your kind introduction. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Before I go into my talk, just a little bit about myself. I grew up in Eastern Oregon on a family farm there. My father was not a minister, and near the Idaho border. I went to a real rural elementary school. There were only 25 students in the whole school, not in my class. So 8 grades, 25 students, one teacher taught first grade to fourth grade, the other teacher taught fifth grade through eighth grade. And sad to say that in the 8th grade, I graduated salutatorian out of a class of 2. Salutatorian is second highest in the class, but there were only 2 in my class. Very easy to remember your classmate's name when you have one classmate. Her name is Mary Lou, never forget her name. Every year I call Mary Lou up. Hey, you want to have a class reunion this year? Oh, no, let's skip this year. Okay. Eventually I graduated valedictorian though, when I graduated from the Institute of Buddhist Studies in Berkeley. But how many students do you think were in my class at that time? I was the only student. So I graduated at the top of my class and at the bottom of my class, both at the same time. So it's a real joy to be here in the Twin Cities to see your wonderful Sangha that you've been in existence for decades. The first time I came, this is only the second time I've been here. The first time I came here was in 1980. And I don't even remember the facility that they met at, but I stayed with the Tsusaki family. And that's when I wasn't even a minister yet. And I was studying in Chicago under the late Reverend Gyomei Kubose. Reverend Ron Nimura at that time said, you need to get some experience. The Twin Cities Sangha meets every so often. I'm going to send you there to speak to them and conduct their service. So that was the only other time I've been to Minneapolis. Today, I'd like to share with you some reflections on our theme for the BCA this year, which is the benefits of following the Shin Buddhist path. So more than talking about the what of Shin Buddhism, we realize we need to talk about the why. Why do we follow this path? Why do we choose to be Shin Buddhists? Next slide. And there's many religions to choose from. And there even are many traditions of Buddhism to choose from. So why Shin Buddhism? Next slide. So let us reflect on the benefits of following the Shin Buddhist path. I'd like to cover a few of the benefits. Next slide. First is the benefit of living from inside out instead of outside in. Let me explain what I mean by that. Next slide. So a Shin Buddhist lives a life from inside out, fulfilling their innermost aspiration, rather than living from outside in, living based on external influences. Next slide. But most of the time, I think we live from outside in. We live thinking that our inner happiness comes from external things, like maybe a car or a house or a perfect spouse. Next slide. This is my dream car. Don't worry, I just drive a used Toyota Camry. BCA did not buy me a Tesla when I became bishop. This is my dream car. Oh, now we get a blue one. So we think, if only I had a Tesla, I would be happy. Next slide. This is my house in Anaheim. So I lived in the church residence for most of the years. About 5 years ago, gosh, where are we going to live when we retire? We need to buy a house. So we bought a house, nothing spectacular, but wow, we have a house. Sort of a dream fulfilled. Next slide. But sometimes external things don't always lead to inner happiness. It leads to more troubles and suffering. For example, after I bought my house, now I got to take care of it. See, when something goes wrong, well, I got to call a repairman or something. Before living in the church residence, I just call the maintenance guys. They come right over to fix it. So all these headaches of owning a home. Next slide. So if we live from inside out, even at work, then work is always fulfilling and meaningful. And I like to give an illustration of what I mean by living from inside out. Next slide. So let's take, for example, two nurses, Nurse A and Nurse B. Nurse A became a nurse because the job pays well, there's demand for nurses, good benefits, good retirement. Nurse A goes to work at the hospital and thinks, oh, they give me too many patients. Why do I have to have so many patients? These doctors are so difficult to work with. And looks at his or her watch. Oh my gosh, 3 more hours till the end of my shift. Oh, well, at least the weekend I'll have to relax. Nurse B, on the other hand, became a nurse because of a deep inner aspiration. Nurse B became a nurse because they want to heal the sick. They want to tend to the sick. So Nurse B goes to the hospital, helps this patient, helps that patient, helps this doctor, helps that doctor, looks at their watch. Oh my gosh, is it time to go home already? I didn't help that other patient. Maybe I'll stay a little bit longer. Both nurses, but one lives from an inner aspiration. Next slide. The next benefit is the benefit of living a life of gratitude. Next slide. So modern psychology is now saying that grateful people are actually happier people. But Shin Buddhism has known this for centuries. It's a core component of our Shin Buddhist life, of the Nembutsu life, living a life of gratitude. Grateful people are happier people. Next slide. So Shin Buddhism teaches us to live a life of gratitude, not that we should be grateful in our life, but based on the teachings, we cannot help but be grateful in our life. Gratitude emerges from within us. Next slide. So this is a passage from the larger sutra. It's read Shoyoku Chisoku, and it means lessen your desires and know you have enough. It doesn't mean eliminate your desires. We always have desires, but lessen your desires and know that you have enough. Next slide. This is the famous rock garden of the Ryoanji Temple in Kyoto, Japan. So before the pandemic, every 4 years, I took our high school group, our YBA group, on a trip to Japan. It was part religious to visit the Honganji, part cultural to see Japan, and part, just fun. So we go to all the famous temples in Kyoto. This is one of the most famous temples, this rock garden. So we're at this Ryoanji looking at this rock garden, and one of my YBA kids comes up to me and says, "Hey, Sensei, so where's the garden?" No, this is the garden. This is the garden. It's so simple. The first time you see it, you can't really appreciate it. But behind this rock garden, I happened to notice this little fountain. And then I'm looking at this little fountain, and I noticed that there's these 4 Chinese characters. And then I realized that you read it, it's a sentence. And that square hole where the water drops into, the square is part of the Chinese characters, of these 4 Chinese characters. Next slide. And these are the Chinese characters. And it's read, Ware tada taru oshiru. The only thing I know in life is that I have enough. Profound statement when you think about it. The author of this Buddhist saying is saying, I don't know much about history, I don't know much about politics, I don't know much about science. The only thing I know in life is gratitude. That I have enough of everything. Enough of everything. So if I have to take it in my own life, I'd have to say, I don't need a Tesla. My used Toyota Camry is enough. It's really enough. You know? The house I live in is not big, but it's more than enough. What BCA pays me, it's enough. Don't tell the BCA I said that. My wife is enough. You know, it didn't quite come out right, but you know what I mean, right? So, next slide. So, to know that everything you have is enough. Next slide. This is one of the most amazing Nembutsu followers, Hisako Nakamura. This is a wonderful book. Our Orange County Buddhist Church published it a few years ago, reprint. It's about Hisako Nakamura, a woman who lived almost her entire life without hands or feet. And here she's writing beautiful calligraphy with the brush in her mouth. Next slide. So although she lived her almost entire life without hands or feet, she writes this poem. I have them, I have them, I have them all. It's all I need. What a refreshing autumn morning. How can a person who has no hands or feet say they have everything? Most of her life, she was bitter about her handicap. Why did I have to have this terrible life without any hands or feet? But she encountered Shin Buddhism. She encountered the Nembutsu. Her whole life was transformed. She looked at her handicapped body as the greatest teaching in her life. Then it led to being able to say something like this. It's all, I have everything. Next slide. The next benefit I'd like to talk about is the benefit of the spiritual strength to live through anything. The spiritual strength to live through anything that we encounter in life. Shin Buddhism gives us that spiritual strength, spiritual foundation. Next slide. So Shinran Shoni calls the path of the Nembutsu the unobstructed path, meaning nothing in life is an obstruction. Not losing your job, it's not an obstruction. Marital difficulties are not an obstruction. Getting a serious illness is not an obstruction. A recession in the economy is not an obstruction. Nothing is an obstacle. Next slide. And I'd like to share about an Orange County Buddhist Church member. I served at Orange County Buddhist Church for 33 years. And this is about one of our members there, Scott Morris, who died of ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. Next slide. So Scott was not raised a Buddhist, but his wife was a Buddhist, and their family started attending, some years ago. Next slide. So Scott was diagnosed with ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, in the early stages. So his first symptoms were he was stumbling a lot, tripping over his feet. ALS starts from your feet, and it works its way up your body. The sad thing about ALS is there's no cure. There's absolutely no cure. The best you can hope for is that you get a slow developing ALS. You might live maybe 10 years, maybe even 20 years. But some people only live a year or two after being diagnosed with ALS. Next slide. So around that time, we created a Living Through Illness support group at the temple to help people that were faced with serious illnesses or someone in the family. And Scott and his wife, Sarima, attended regularly. Next slide. And one session that we were having, Scott was kind of sad. He was talking about all the things in life that he would be missing out on. At that time, his children were quite young, about maybe 10 years and 7 years of age. He said, I'm probably not going to live long enough to attend my son's high school graduation. I'm probably not going to live long enough to walk my daughter down the aisle when she gets married someday. And, he's talking about missing out on all of these things of life. Next slide. So I thought, gee, how can I help Scott here? So I thought, well, at that time, he could still use his Hands okay. So I said, well, why don't you, write some letters to your children that you want them to read at those events in their life. Leave the letter that you want your son to read on the day of his high school graduation. Leave a letter that you want your daughter to read when she gets married someday. And then you can be there in that sense. So I thought, oh, well, maybe that'll help them. Next slide. But the next week, he said, Sensei, I wrote something. The next month when we had our gathering, and I thought he had written one of those letters, but instead he shared this poem. He had composed a poem. So this is Scott Morrison's poem. I have ALS, and I am grateful. I am grateful to retire early to be with my family. Next slide. I am grateful I have family and friends that are so supportive and hopeful. I am grateful I can still walk and get around. Next slide. When that is gone, I'm grateful that I can still use my hands to feed myself. So as I said, ALS starts with your legs, your feet, and it works its way up. So eventually you can't use your hands, then you lose your speech, and then it takes your life when you can no longer breathe. But your mind's alert through this whole process. So when that is gone, I'm grateful I can still use my hands to feed myself. Next slide. When that is gone, I am grateful I can still breathe and laugh and feel. Next slide. And when that is gone, I am grateful I had a wonderful life. Next slide. And when that is gone, Namu Amida. I put this poem right up there with any of our great Shin Buddhist poets, Nyo Koni, Scott Morris, in a relatively short amount of time, came to receive the Ninbutsu, not just as a word, not just as something we say, but as a deep and profound truth, something that transcends life and death, something that enables him to touch the timeless, to transcend life and death. Next slide. The next benefit is the benefit of being a part of a Sangha, which all of you are. Next slide. So Sangha means to be part of a community, a family. In a Sangha, we develop lifelong friends. Many of you, I'm sure, are lifelong friends. We listen to the Dharma and we share in the Dharma together. Next slide. So once Shakyamuni Buddha was asked by a disciple, how important is it to have friends in the Sangha, on the Buddhist path? Is it 10%? Is it 50%? How important is it? And the Buddha replied, it's everything. The Sangha is everything in our path, our life as a Buddhist. Next slide. So many people are seeking to find a Sangha to be a part of. Maybe you've heard of this expression, nightstand Buddhist. Many people have read many books on Buddhism, but they've never been a part of the Sangha, found a Sangha. So that's where we need to continue to make this Sangha accessible so people can encounter a community of Buddhists. Next slide. For being a part of a Sangha, serving a Sangha is also something that we do from inside out, meaning we serve, we help because we want to, but because we have to. So it's a privilege to serve. We benefit from serving, from helping. There's more joy in giving than in receiving. So if you're ever asked to head up a bazaar or a chicken teriyaki fundraiser or something, well, it's really a great joy. It's a privilege to serve. Next slide. And the benefit of now never lacking meaning in your life. Next slide. So Shinran Shonin writes in one of his poems that for a person who encounters the Buddha's vow, which is the heart of the Buddha, their life does not pass in vain. Next slide. There was a well-known Shin Buddhist scholar priest of the Higashi tradition, Daiin Kaneko, And he was bedridden in the last years of his life, but he writes that those years taught him the most about gratitude. He was dependent on others to feed him, bathe him, clothe him. And he said that he really learned about the meaning of gratitude during those last years of his life. So there's always meaning in life, even if you're bedridden and you're an invalid. Next slide. One of our late members, late Sachi Ochiai, she was a wonderful member in Dilaw Shin Buddhism, and her greatest joy was to listen to the Dharma. She always had meaning and fulfillment in her life. Next slide. So there are many benefits to following the path of Shin Buddhism. By following the path, we receive those numerous benefits as we encounter the heart of the Buddha Dharma that is manifested as the Nembutsu, Namo Amida. And I think the final slide. Oh, and so I'd just like to reflect on those benefits that we receive from following the Shin Buddhist path, and that we need to continue to share this path so that others may also receive those benefits. And the next slide, I think, is my last slide. No.